The water of Cam Ranh Bay was not merely dark, it was a suffocating, heavy shroud of oil, silt, and blood that the moon refused to touch. Beneath the surface, the silence was a lie. To the human ear, it was dead quiet, but to the sensors, it was a cacophony of terrifying potential. A single metallic clank echoed against the hull of the USS Card, a sound so faint it could have been a shifting current, or it could have been the magnetic clamp of a limpet mine sealing the fate of 300 sailors sleeping above. Then the shockwave hit. A plume of white water erupted into the night sky, shattering the stillness, followed instantly by the gut-wrenching groan of tearing steel. Men screamed, alarms wailed like banshees, and the smell of burning diesel choked the humid Vietnam air. It was chaos, it was destruction, and it was invisible. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Cosmic Conquerors channel. Before we begin, please subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any of our new content, and share this story with friends so it reaches as many people as possible. If you have a story idea, drop it in the comments. Maybe we'll use it in the next video. Let's begin the story. Pay close attention, because there is one small decision made before the dawn that will change the destiny of nations. The year was 1970. The Vietnam War was bleeding the American spirit dry, but the true terror wasn't always in the jungle. It was in the harbors. The Viet Cong had deployed elite swimmer sappers, frogmen capable of swimming miles with nothing but a breathing tube and a satchel charge, turning billion-dollar aircraft carriers into sinking tombs. The U.S. Navy was desperate. They had sonar, yes, but mechanical sonar struggled in the cluttered, trash-filled waters of a busy harbor. They needed something smarter, something faster, something that didn't just see, but understood. Enter Lieutenant Commander Jack "Mack" McAllister. Mack wasn't a typical officer. He was a man who smelled more like brine and dead fish than starch and brass. He stood before a panel of skeptical admirals in a sterile room in the Pentagon, his knuckles white as he gripped the podium. The air conditioning hummed, a stark contrast to the sweating jungles he was proposing to enter. "Gentlemen," Mack said, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over outboard motors, "you are spending millions on radar that can't see through mud. I am offering you a guidance system that has been perfected by 20 million years of evolution. It cannot be jammed, it cannot be fooled, and it costs less than a single torpedo." He wasn't talking about a machine. He was talking about the Atlantic bottlenose dolphin. The room was silent, heavy with skepticism. Admiral Vance, a man whose face was etched with the stress of a losing war, leaned forward. "You want to send Flipper to fight the Viet Cong, Commander? This is a war council, not a circus." "It is a war of attrition, Admiral," Mack countered, his eyes hard. "And right now, we are losing the underwater front. These animals have a biological sonar, echolocation, that can distinguish between a piece of aluminum and a piece of copper from 100 yards away in pitch blackness. They don't just find the enemy, they hunt them. Tell me, friends, if you were in that room, would you have laughed him out of the building, or would you have signed the check? Let me know in the comments." Mack got his funding, but it came with a crushing burden. Success was mandatory. Failure meant the program would be scrapped, and the Dolphins? Well, no one spoke about what happened to classified assets that were no longer useful. The stakes were absolute. The theater of operations shifted to the murky, dangerous waters of Cam Ranh Bay. Mack arrived with his team and 5 special biological units. The leader of this pod was a scarred, muscular male dolphin named Tuffy. Tuffy wasn't a pet, he was a soldier. He had been trained not for tricks, but for the Swimmer Nullification Program. The strategy was brutal in its simplicity. The dolphin would patrol the perimeter. Upon detecting the heartbeat or the air bubbles of an enemy swimmer, the animal would not attack directly. Instead, it would ram a device onto the intruder. A marker, sometimes attached to a buoy, effectively tagging the target for the Navy SEALs to eliminate. In darker iterations of the rumor mill, the device was a compressed gas needle that would force the enemy to the surface, incapacitated. The psychological toll on the trainers was immense. These men lived with the dolphins, fed them, and bonded with them deeper than they did with their own families back home. Yet, every night, they sent these innocent creatures into a kill zone filled with explosives and jagged metal. Mack watched Tuffy slip into the black water night after night, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew that the Viet Cong weren't stupid. They would adapt. They would learn to kill the dolphins. Resources were scarce. The fish required to feed the unit had to be flown in, high-quality mackerel that the infantry grunts looked at with envy while eating canned rations. This created friction. The fishmen, as Mack's team was called, were mocked. Toy soldiers, the Marines spat. But Mack ignored the insults. He was fighting a different war, a war of frequencies and sound waves. Then came the night of the monsoon moon. The rain was falling so hard it felt like gravel hitting the skin. Visibility was zero. Intelligence reports indicated a massive sapper attack was imminent, aimed at the ammunition pier where the USS Vulture, loaded with thousands of tons of ordnance, was docked. If that ship went up, it would take half the base with it. Mack stood on the floating pontoon, water streaming off his poncho. He looked at Tuffy. The dolphin was agitated, clicking furiously, his blowhole snapping open and shut. The animal sensed it before the machines did. The water was alive with tension. "Go," Mack whispered. He didn't give a hand signal. The bond was telepathic at this point. Tuffy vanished into the abyss. Mack put on his headset, listening to the hydrophone feedback. The underwater world was a chaotic symphony of snapping shrimp and engine hums. But Mack was listening for the anomaly, the rhythm of a human swimmer. Click, 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 whir, whir. The signal came back. Tuffy had a lock. Not one swimmer, 4. Approaching the hull of the Vulture from the unprotected stern. "Contact! Multiple contacts! Sector 4!" Mack screamed into the radio. The base sirens erupted, slicing through the rain. Searchlights swept the water, turning the rain into blinding sheets of diamonds. But light couldn't penetrate the depths. It was all up to the dolphin. Through the hydrophone, Mack heard the frantic acceleration of the animal. Tuffy was closing in. The strategy was risky. The dolphin had to tag the leader, disrupting the formation. If the swimmers panicked and detonated their charges early, Tuffy would be turned into red mist. "Come on, buddy, come on," Mack prayed, his fingernails digging into the wood of the rail. Then, a sound that wasn't natural. A high-pitched electronic screech tore through the headphones, causing Mack to rip them off in pain. It wasn't an explosion. It was a frequency, a jammer. Mack froze. The Viet Cong didn't have high-tech acoustic jammers. They were guerrilla fighters. This was Soviet technology. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just a skirmish with rebels. The Soviet Union was here, in the shadows, testing their own countermeasures. They knew about the dolphins. The water churned violently. A flare popped, illuminating the surface. For a second, Mack saw it. A diver surfacing, thrashing, not because he was tagged, but because he was being rammed. Tuffy was violating protocol. He wasn't tagging, he was fighting. The dolphin, confused by the jamming signal that scrambled his echolocation, had reverted to primal instinct. He was using his rostrum, his beak, as a battering ram. Shots rang out. The SEAL teams on the pier opened fire at the water. "Cease fire! Cease fire! You'll hit the asset!" Mack roared, tackling a gunner to the ground. The chaos was absolute. Friendly fire, enemy sabotage, and a confused animal caught in the middle. Suddenly, the water went still. The screeching frequency stopped. Mack ran to the edge of the pier, staring into the oily blackness. Seconds felt like hours. The strategic value of the pier, the millions of dollars in ammo, the geopolitical consequences of the ship exploding, none of it mattered to Mack in that moment. All that mattered was the gray fin. And then, a break in the surface. Tuffy appeared, swimming slowly, listing to the side. He was bleeding from a graze along his flank, but he was alive. Behind him, 2 bodies floated face down, their rebreathers severed. The other 2 had fled. The base was saved. The Vulture remained intact. The fishmen were heroes, but the victory felt hollow. The twist came the next morning. When divers recovered the enemy gear, they found the source of the jamming. It wasn't just a jammer. It was a prototype biological mimicry device. The Soviets hadn't just supplied tech, they had been recording the dolphins. The device was designed to play back the distress calls of a calf, intending to lure the guard dolphins into a trap. But Tuffy hadn't been lured. He had attacked the source of the sound. The enemy's attempt to exploit the dolphin's empathy had instead triggered its protective rage. But the true revelation was darker. Mack found a logbook in the waterproof casing of the lead sapper. It contained detailed movements of the dolphin pens. There was a leak. Someone inside the base, someone who thought the program was an abomination, or perhaps was paid by the other side, had sold them out. The dolphins were fighting a war on two fronts, the enemy in the water and the betrayal on land. Decades passed. The Cold War thawed, but the programs didn't vanish. They evolved. The dolphins of Vietnam gave way to the mine hunters of the Persian Gulf. In 2003, during Operation Iraqi Freedom, it was dolphins, the descendants of Tuffy's generation, who cleared the port of Qas, allowing humanitarian aid to flow. The technology of man could never replicate the intuition of the beast. We built drones, we built AI, but nothing could replace the heartbeat of a creature that chose to serve. However, the ethical scars remain. Is it honor to weaponize innocence? Is it strategy? Or is it cruelty? Mack retired quietly, never visiting an aquarium again. He spent his final years by a lake, skipping stones, haunted by the screech of that jammer and the trust of a creature he had sent into the dark. War is often painted as a chessboard of generals, but sometimes the most crucial moves are made by pawns that don't even know they are playing the game. The legacy of the spy dolphin is not just in the ships they saved, but in the uncomfortable mirror they hold up to us, showing us that we are willing to bend the very laws of nature to secure our dominion. And now, a thought to carry with you. Man prides himself on his intelligence, yet when the world goes dark, he relies on the instincts of the beasts he deems beneath him. Listen closely. Do you hear that? The faint, high-pitched click in the static? The ocean never forgets, and neither does the war. Who do you think bore the true guilt for that night? The enemy who laid the trap, or the commanders who put nature in the crossfire? If you were on that council, would you have voted to end the program? I want to read your thoughts. And with that, we've reached the end of the story. But stories don't end here. If you liked this one, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. And if something caught your attention, leave it in the comments and let's discuss it together. I'll be waiting for your opinions. See you in the next story. Goodbye.